Hi students, in this video I want to spend just a few minutes talking about a paper by Cathryn Rosen titled The Battered Women's Defense. And as you might suspect by the title, this paper takes up sort of how we should think about the battered woman's defense. Is it a good defense? Is it a justification? Is it an excuse? Those sorts of questions. So Rosen has three different theses. What are they? First, she wants to argue that appreciating a woman's claim that she killed in self-defense requires appreciating a number of factual generalizations. So basically, we need to appreciate some facts. And when we think about a woman's claim that she killed in self-defense, we need to keep those facts in mind to appreciate the kind of, appreciate the fact that maybe the act was in self-defense even though it didn't maybe look like it. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is that battered women who kill their husbands in circumstances similar to those of Janice Leadholm should not be considered justified in their act, but they should be excused. So basically, women like Janice Leadholm should be excused. There might be some reason to think that they should be justified, but she doesn't think that that's correct. And then finally, the third thesis is that killing in self-defense should never be considered justified. At most, it should be excused. So I think it's maybe pretty plausible that we think Janice Leadholm isn't justified in doing what she did, but she's excused for doing it. But the sort of interesting thing that Cathryn Rosen is going to say is that killing in self-defense shouldn't be ever considered justified. It should always be considered an excuse. So we're going to look again real quick at these three theses. So thesis number one, appreciating a woman's claim that she killed in self-defense requires appreciating a number of factual generalizations. So what are those factual generalizations? First, she notes the criminal justice system does not adequately protect women from their abusers, right? Oftentimes when a male abuser is put into prison or jail, that sentence is pretty short. The next thing you know, they're getting out, they're going to be harming their partner again, in many cases, women again. So it's not really protecting women from people who are abusive. Next, we should note that it's reasonable for women to believe that unarmed men can kill them. So women, again, this is speaking in generalities, right? There are probably a lot of women who could kill a bunch of men, even if unarmed, but it seems like, generally speaking, men being physically stronger are able to kill women sort of like with their bare hands or something like that. So a man doesn't need to have a weapon in order for a woman to be justified in using a weapon to harm him. In the case of Janice Leadholm, right, she has a knife, he doesn't have any weapon. Three, it's reasonable for women to believe that they must use a weapon to protect themselves from unarmed men. And this sort of follows, right, from the fact that unarmed men can kill them. 4, a victim's past conduct will influence the defendant's perception of the situation. So even when maybe a man isn't harming a woman at the moment, right, the woman knows that, like, this man is going to harm her at some point in the future. Maybe, in certain cases, right, when he's sleeping, well, probably won't be for a while, but when he's awake, if something's upsetting him, something like that, a woman's experience with that man will allow her to see the situation for what it is, and might help her see the situation differently than someone who doesn't have that experience. 5, it's possible for someone who's enraged or vengeful to kill in self-defense. So the important point is here that in order for killing in self-defense to be justified or excused, or whatever it is, you might think, well, it can't be done from a sense of rage or vengeance. But I think Rosen points out here, and I think this is correct, that it's possible for someone to simultaneously be enraged and vengeful and really angry, right, and to kill in self-defense. To kill not because they just don't like the person, they want them dead, but rather because they feel threatened at the same time. Okay, so that's thesis number one. Thesis number two is that battered women who kill their husbands in circumstances similar to those of Janice Leadholm should not be considered justified, but they should be excused. So what's the thought here? I'm going to read a quote from Rosen's piece. So she says, successful use of the battered women's defense theory depends in part on defense counsel's ability to persuade the court and jury that a person who did not suffer from battered women syndrome would not be justified under identical, objectively identifiable circumstances. This, however, is inherently inconsistent with the concept of justification. So, again, this is maybe kind of a tricky thought, something that, reading, seeing this in context will maybe help with. But the idea here is that in the case of justification, we're saying it was a good thing that you did that. Yeah, I guess it's a good thing that you did it. It was objectively good, like regardless of, what you were thinking at the time. This is the kind of thing that the law wants to allow. An act is excused when we sort of think, well, that's a really sort of a bad thing. We didn't really want you doing that, but we understand why you did it, and we don't think we should punish you, given that we can sort of understand your reasons. So when we're using the battered woman's defense, we're trying to persuade the court and jury, right, that a person who didn't suffer from battered women syndrome would not be justified under identical, objectively identifiable circumstances. So sort of like if the person is reasonable, they're not experiencing living with battered woman syndrome, it wouldn't be okay for them to do what the person just did. But in this case, given the person's circumstances, right, their state of mind, their psychology, their experience, given all those things, this person, it is sort of reasonable from the inside, right? It's subjectively reasonable for them to do what they did. And that kind of explanation isn't an explanation that sort of says, yeah, it's a good thing that you did what you did, and we're glad that you did it. No, it's one that's sort of admitting that, like, something's gone wrong. And if we're admitting that something's gone wrong, then we're talking about something that should be an excuse, not something that should count as a justification. So there's an objection to thinking about the battered woman's defense as an excuse rather than a justification. And the objection is this. So if we excuse battered women who kill in circumstances they believe create a right of self-defense, we may perpetuate an undesirable view or undesirable views that women are by nature irrational and that their lives are unworthy of self-defense against a man. So the thought here is that if ordinarily we say that self-defense is a justification, but in battered woman's defense kind of cases we say killing in self-defense is not a justification, it's an excuse, then it looks like what we're doing is like, it turns out that in cases where women are inclined to kill in self-defense, they're excused, it's not something we really want them doing, but, we're going to say it's okay. And then when men get in situations where they kill in self-defense, their act ends up being justified, and we end up saying like, good, it was good for you to do what you did. And it seems like there's like some sort of like sexism in the background here, that men are justified in killing in self-defense when they do it, but women are excused, and they're excused because, right, we don't really want them doing it. We want to discourage them from doing what they're doing. Okay, so this raises a question. If it's inappropriate to consider the battered woman's defense to be an excuse, given that self-defense is ordinarily considered a justification, should courts consider the battered woman's defense to be a justification? Or alternatively, should they change their view about ordinary self-defense, right, and think of it not as a justification, but think of it as an excuse? So just to restate the problem, the thought is, if we don't want to suggest that women are irrational, then whatever we say about the battered woman syndrome is sort of the same thing we should say about the kinds of cases when men kill in self-defense. So either they should sort of both be justifications, or they should both be excuses. Which one do we think is right? So that's our third thesis, right? Killing in self-defense should never be considered justified. At most, it should be excused. And again, I'm going to quote from her. So she says, even an unlawful aggressor is not necessarily a threat to all society. The attacker may only be a threat to one other person, the defender. Therefore, self-defense can only be the lesser evil if the interests of the defender that the aggressor threatens are greater than the aggressor's interest in life. What she's saying here, she's saying, well, typically when we think about killing in self-defense, we're imagining a case where someone's a bad person, right? And they're trying to kill a good person. And the law, we might think, should prefer, like, if somebody's got to die, either a bad person or a good person, then it's the bad person that should die. So they ordinarily think of self-defense as a justification, right? It's good that you killed that person. But what she's pointing out is that, it's not good. Killing in self-defense is never good. That you killed someone is a bad thing. It's a bad thing that someone had to die. And so, even in the ordinary case, we shouldn't think, oh, you did a good thing, like, good job. Rather, in all cases of killing in self-defense, we should think of them as sort of a bad thing, right, that happened. Excused, right, okay, we're not going to punish you, but not the kind of thing that we want to encourage or say, like, good job, and pat you on the back for. All right, so that leaves us with just this final question. And the question is this, right? Is it better to think of self-defense as a justification or as an excuse? So in the sort of ordinary case, is killing in self-defense something that we think is justified, right? It's good that people do it. Or is it better thought of as something like, that's not really good that people do, but rather it's just something that leads us to not want to punish them, given that they've done it. So, they're threatened by someone, their life is in danger, they kill in self-defense. We're not going to sort of pat them in the back and say, good job, but rather, should we think of it more as an excuse, where it's like, we really didn't want you doing that, but we sort of understand why you did it. So that's the question I'll leave you with. Hopefully this video was helpful at illuminating this paper. Bye.